Good evening and welcome to you in Radio Land at home and abroad on Facebook and on all the other networks and platforms. We acknowledge you on the several other online streaming platforms. This is the Global View on Q. And it's Tuesday, 17th August. It's 8:05 p.m. at Q95, the big station. It's the 32nd Tuesday of 2021. And I'm Sheridan Gregoire, Mr. G. I'm delighted, as usual, to have my distinguished guest, Dr. Dion George in Atlanta, Georgia, Tony Gabriel Christian in Washington, D.C., and our own Dr. Irving Andre with us tonight as well. Last week, many people asked for him. I got into a lot of trouble because he was not with us. Tonight, we are pleasing you again, and Dr. Irving Andre is right here with us tonight. We will examine the way forward for Dominica with the 1979 Caribbean Spring in our rearview mirror, in hindsight, so to speak, and in the face of a wave of dissatisfaction and frustration that appears to be emerging from the people of Dominica, fueled by this COVID-19 crisis, anger over economic mismanagement by inexperienced policymakers, some people say, political victimization and abuse, we will in fact be guided by lessons from Guyana, from Cuba, from Haiti, from St. Vincent, St. Lucia, Antigua, and now Barbados, to name a few, amid fears of vaccine mandates, among other concerns. So in Dominica, at this time, there is no stimulus package. There has not been for individuals or for small businesses or tourism stakeholders or farmers and transportation providers in the face of this deepening poverty that we can see glaring before our own eyes and rising costs of living. We see these ominous trends of political greed, autocracy, misconduct in parliament, police threatening opposition members in the parliament, DPP nolly-crossing democracy, private attorneys wearing conflicting hats at the helm of so-called independent state institutions. So here's a question. What can or will Dominicans and friends of Dominica at home and abroad do to help reverse these worrisome trends? Is there a new Caribbean Spring on the way? That's a question. Are emerging actions on the ground now trending towards the removal of political obstacles in the way of progress in the region? Are we on the eve of a youth movement for regional paradigm shift towards what we all desire, which is sustainable development planning, international competitiveness, and the revitalization of the spirit of graciousness, the spirit of love and peace, prosperity and unity for Kalinago and Afro-Caribbean people? Are we witnessing the beginning of the end of the questionable diminishing mono-foreign earnings passport peddling economy and weak financial management that translates into extensive waste of financial resources? Are we seeing these things on the horizon? Tonight, we look to Dr. Irving Andre, Dr. Dion George, and Tony Gabriel Christian to help us see the way forward to removing these obstacles that stand in the way of our progress, putting COVID-19 behind us, and opening the door to a new dispensation of democracy. As usual, we discuss the good, we discuss the bad, the ugly, and the dangerous, and then we always try to make recommendations for a way forward for all Dominicans. And we do this with no anger, with no malice, no personal attacks, no vilification, no divisiveness, just simply bringing back civility, the good old civility, a caring society and governance. So wherever you are in Dominica, in the region and globally, please join the conversation and stay tuned to this space right here on Q. Get the answers to your questions on the Global View on Q, as you do every Tuesday with me, Mr. G, only on Q95, the big station. So I ask you, all listeners, are the people of the Caribbean and Dominica in particular ready to pursue progressive initiatives that will bring real investments, real employment, real foreign earnings, real wealth to born Dominicans? We're live on Facebook at Q95 FM Radio and on YSQFM. Share the live and invite your friends to join the Q family. Get the latest breaking local, regional, and international news and happenings. Another big issue, of course, is this question of misdirected, and misguided foreign policies that allow villains and wanted crooks on the run to acquire Dominica's passports, as we saw again recently with the Nigerian couple, and who display conduct that damages our international image. While right here at home, justice is delayed, justice is denied for decent law-abiding Dominicans. So we are now on the critical crossroad, as we say, where we must choose to stand united and make modern electoral reforms and campaign finance reforms and engage in long-term planning for real resilience, real sustainable development that values environmental preservation and the proper management and use of our valuable natural resources and cultural endowments. So we continue to recognize the imperative to eliminate poverty. This is what we're talking about, to stop corruption, to generate real income, find higher living standards, a better quality of life and health, justice without delays, resilience and sustainability for Afro-Caribbean people. And we continue to remind ourselves that Dominica still has too much widespread poverty, too much mendicancy, too much unemployment, insufficient jobs, abuse of women and children and elderly, inadequate housing, increasingly brutal crimes, a struggling economy, insufficient affordable housing, health insurance, and healthcare. None of this, of course, is contributing to generating optimal wealth for the born Dominicans. None of it is eliminating this lingering mendicancy and dependency on handouts, or helping our people to independently maintain good health through good sustainable jobs, or through their own enterprise by utilizing adding value to our natural human resources, or enabling people, for that matter, to independently take care of themselves and their families by ensuring a better quality of life and better living standards. Instead of choosing this better path, our policymakers appear to be attempting to legislate public officer salaries to about 1% increase for 13 years and potentially sidelining public officers, unions, and associations. So tonight, as usual, we discuss, we recommend, but you are the one who will decide what you think about the information that we disseminate. And we say a heartfelt thank you, meanwhile, as we always do, to you, our healthcare providers and frontline workers, in this escalating, dreaded COVID-19 situation. I ask all of you to please follow their advice, their guidelines and protocols. Play it safe, stay alive. So happy to have you with us tonight, wherever you are, in your neck of the woods, in Dominica, in the region, and in the global community. We will take your calls later on, and you will get the numbers from Lambi. Sherwin Norris, our engineer, will keep us on the air as usual, and Lambi Charles on the console will be directing traffic. He will direct your calls as well. So having said all of that and created a little background here, let's get started. I go now to our learned Dr. Irving Andre to make his opening remarks and to get the ball rolling with his initial 12-minute contribution to the conversation. I hope Dr. Andre will give us some insights into his two new books to be launched on Friday night here, right here on Q95, and that he will also make the link as to what would Rosie Douglas have been thinking about our current foreign affairs and whether Rosie would have been inclined to support this emerging Caribbean spring and financial stimulus for struggling Dominicans and for Dominican small businesses. And I also look forward to political scientist Dr. Dion George and attorney Gabriel Christian, following up after Dr. Andre with their own 12-minute presentations and with some clear recommendations as to the way forward out of this current quandary. And we take your calls. We'll take your calls at about 9 after the first round of presentation by our panelists. So Dr. Andre, I ask you now to turn on your mic, and as I now turn to you to give us your opening remarks and to get us going. Dr. Andre?
Thank you, Mr. G. Let me commend you for your wonderful introduction. I think you exceeded yourself. And in your usual inimitable style, you've basically encapsulated all that plagues us today as we speak. Let me thank the esteemed panelists, Dr. George, Dr. Christian, Dr. Lambi, and Mr. G. And let me start by saying that this is the day that the Lord has made. We have to be thankful and rejoice, because even in the bleakest of days, the bleakest of nights, there is some basis to be optimistic about the future. After all, we've been spared the wrath or the pestilence that plagues us. After all, we still maintain our strength, our hopes, our convictions, our determination to make this piece of rock a better place. And as long as there is that strength and fortitude, there is hope. And as we start this program tonight, hopefully we can impart that sense of optimism and hope to those who are listening, those who are seeking some inspiration, those who are seeking some strength to tarry on. Because let's face it, if the battle was easily won, quite frankly, we wouldn't even be having this event this evening. You made reference to the Caribbean Spring. You made reference to the Caribbean Spring of the 1970s. As you know, and as your leaders, your readers, your listeners know, and Mr. G, someone told me this evening, and I don't know if it's true, that today, this Tuesday, is Black Pudding Tuesday. So you may not have too many listeners. I hope that is not the case.
Well, you can ask Gabriel about that.
I assume that even with 75% discount on Black Pudding on Tuesday, that you still have your dedicated core of listeners who are seeking sustenance to give them the engine and to give them the fuel to continue the fight. In the 1970s was a decade of great tumult, a decade of great upheaval. As you know, and as your listeners know, many of the leaders of the Eastern Caribbean were weaned from the type of social democratic context. Many of them came through the union movement, either in the 40s or the 50s, or the 60s. In the 60s, as Patrick John. But when you had leaders such as Bradshaw from St. Kitts, Bud from Antigua, you had obviously Mr. John, you had Josh Wilson from Zinfant, and you had the notorious Eric Gary from Grenada. They had been weaned in a tradition of social democracy. They had been weaned on a program where they tried to offer reforms to the majority of the working population. But by 1970, suffice it to say, the leadership had become somewhat jaded. By the 1970s, which was a decade which was afflicted by significant economic turmoil. You may remember the oil crisis of 1973. You may remember the significant unemployment in Dominica in the early 70s. You may remember that as the economy shrunk within the region, there was greater pressure from the youth intelligentsia, the radical thinkers of the decade. And Dominica had its fair share of these thinkers. You may recall that many of these leaders reacted by trying to adopt semi-draconian measures to maintain themselves in power. We know the situation with Eric Gary in Grenada. We know what happened in terms of Bird in Antigua. In fact, the name VC Bird became a metaphor for everything that was wrong with small island government in the 1970s. You had a great deal of upheaval because many of these intellectuals returned from Grenada, they returned from the United States, they returned from Canada, armed with all this revolution in radical thinking, inspired by a need to create a new paradigm shift, to create a government which was more attuned to the wishes and desires of the growing population, animated and encouraged by the need to provide greater opportunities for the young, for those from marginalized backgrounds, university opportunities, educational opportunities, employment opportunities. And what you had, the intersection of this new thinking and the old guard, the old social democratic guard, which was clinging tenaciously to power. You had a great degree of social upheaval, and you had what you've determined to be a Caribbean Spring. And you know, by 1979, many of these old reformist governments fell by the wayside. We know what happened in Grenada. Weber, if my memory serves me right, did not survive throughout the 70s. Bradshaw, if my memory serves me right, died on about 1979. You had change, and we know what happened, obviously, to Mr. John in 1979. Again, I should mention, as somebody will mention this evening, a greater degree of union militancy. It's a union militancy based on a number of reformist ideas and ideas, an obsession to get significant wage increases, as in 121%. Compare and contrast that with 1 to 2% annually. Public service union appeared to be satisfied with. There was an agitation for a wage increase of 121%. Have we gone complacent? We speak of a renewed Caribbean Spring, but the fundamental question we have to confront is, have we grown complacent? Have we just accepted with a degree of fatalism, which reflects our faith? God will provide. You just have to quote Jeremiah and everything will fall into place. But what about that part of the scripture which says he will only help those who help themselves? What about that part of the scripture which tells you that where you sow your seed, where you sow your talent, will determine the type of fruit that you sow, that you reap? What about those aspects of the Bible which talks about you making use of those resources provided to you by the Almighty Father? What about the social conscience epitomized in the parables, the lepers? Over and over again, we see God saving those who are most socially disadvantaged, those who are persecuted, those who lack any winds, give them their sails, the ability to chart new water in terms of their own personal successes. What about the intelligences given us? What about the sense of community? What about the desire for change? Where has it all gone? That is the crucial question we have now. Yes, we can talk about a potential Caribbean Spring. Where has it gone within the context of Dominica? We know what's happening in St. Vincent. In Grenada, they would celebrate in Carnival with or without COVID. The dichotomy between COVID and Carnival, they chose Carnival. In Barbados, in Antigua, the folks all received stimulus packages. Yet they felt it necessary to exercise their democratic rights, show their discontent about governance in their country. So how can we be talking about Caribbean Spring in Dominica? Really? Where is that spring? In fact, all I'm seeing is rain. Rain which dampens, saps the energy and the desire for self-upliftment, taking up of our own struggles, as opposed to waiting for an entity to take it. What is the fundamental question? What is wrong? What is different here in Dominica? Why is it so? What made it so? Nupamuntu? Is there something about us that makes us oblivious to suffering, oblivious to persecution, oblivious to being disadvantaged on a daily basis, oblivious to receiving our fair share of the pie? There's the much vaunted assertion that we have not received stimulus packages. But who are receiving the brown paper bags which are being distributed in the middle of the night, under the moonlight? Who's receiving it? Who's receiving significant stimulus packages insofar as rents are concerned, insofar as luxuries are concerned? There is, in fact, stimulus packages. But the fundamental question is, who is benefiting and receiving them? Why is it so? Why should we accept? Why should we accept that when the World Health Organization gives millions and millions for stimulus packages, it's not being distributed in accordance with the wishes of the donor? How can we talk about the Caribbean Spring when this is what is being perpetuated on a daily basis? And we are content with this, as long as we say 1,000 novenas. No, we have to take up arms, not necessarily physically, but we have to take up our own struggle have to become our biggest advocates. We have to protect our own interests on a collective basis. This is what democracy is all about. The right to peaceful protest is a struggle in St. Vincent, in Antigua, in Barbados, because it is an integral component of democracy in any country. The right to voice your opinion if you're dissatisfied with the way things are going. Why should we not be in a mode or in the mood to exercise those rights? Why are we prepared to just give them away at a time of hardship? What do we need to exercise those rights and to reclaim those rights? Have we surrendered them? Perhaps for a brown paper bag in the middle of the night? No, it is more important than that. And that is what we have to deal with. You talked about what would Rosie say. There's no mystery. Rosie's life was dedicated to the cause of uplifting his people. You know where he lived. Not surprisingly, the home is still a broken down edifice close to the market. Doesn't even have an upper section. We knew he knew his philosophy. We knew the untold generosity of the man, giving away even his own property. We knew his disdain for the accoutrements of success. We knew his disdain of ostentation. We know his disdain for pomp and pageantry. We know his disdain for persecuting others. We knew his disdain for seeking to perpetuate himself in power. So his philosophy was a total reversal and negation of what happened in the 70s, of what's happening even today. Because he felt that he should either serve one term or two terms. He felt that perhaps after the first term, he should go to Africa to help the cause of the liberating the continent. That was his belief. He felt that all shall eat, and that some shall not eat all, or some shall not eat everybody else. He slept in his own bed, a coconut fiber mattress, I believe. He was content to do that. He would drive, his loyal acolytes would tell you, he would drive to Portsmouth to sleep in his own room, in his own house. It meant nothing, because to him, the question of being a prime minister was to serve his people, was to negate all those impulses of selfishness which plague all of us, except that some of us control those impulses much better than others. But isn't that what we need today when there's significant suffering? When the whole world has been ravaged by the perils of COVID? When Dominica has been affected in a significant fashion, probably to a greater extent? And bear in mind one thing, we talk about the Caribbean Spring now. In all of these Eastern Caribbean countries, Antigua, Barbados, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, they got stimulus packages. But did that stop them from exercising their democratic rights for peaceful protest? In St. Vincent, there was a stone throwing incident. But it was a peaceful protest. And the right of a population to protest peacefully in pursuance of its rights is integral to a democratic state. And that is where we are now. We are at this critical juncture. We have to ask ourselves, a situation where we have been ravaged to such an extent, in a situation where, quite frankly, there's so much suffering, a situation where the rate of infection has galloped abroad to an extent which has induced fear in the hearts of many Dominicans. The question is, what are we doing to salvage and to rescue our community? What sacrifices are we prepared to make? What are we prepared to do to preserve it? That is the fundamental, and $64,000 question, which adopt a fatalistic perspective by saying it's all God's will? Or do we use the resources that the Father has provided us and say, here is what we have to do to take care of ourselves, and to receive the assistance of the Heavenly Father? I heard a press conference about COVID a few days ago. There was talk about everyone should take the vaccine. And the discussion reminded me of something Gabriel Christian loved to talk about, the scientific method. There was no questioning why in July 31st we had 9 cases, and 12 days later we had over 300, and today we have double that amount. No one dealt with that 800-pound gorilla in that panel discussion. No one did talk about why that rate of infection increased so significantly. Political irresponsibility in the August weekend. Instigated, sanctioned, endorsed by the political director. And even the Facebook images I saw was correct. You had young people dancing to their heart's consent, as if in Babylon, biblical Babylon, no thought for anything. After all, it was said that we could teach the Americans a thing or two to deal with COVID. Isn't that what we said? And ironically, we are in terms of alert, we're now at the highest plane in terms of alert regarding the potential of being infected by COVID. We have to do better. We have to look deep within ourselves. We have to give birth to the little kings and queens within us. That it is within us that the salvation dominantly rests. And with that comment, I rest my case.
Yes, and thanks a lot for that. Thanks a lot for that, Dr. Andre. You said quite a bit. I know you have a lot more to say, and we will come back to you later for a second round, the second dose of all that edification there. But I have to, the last comment you made, I don't want to go back and comment on any of the other ones because I know that Dr. Dion George will help us to expand a little bit more on the Caribbean Spring concept, what's happening in the region, because it's important for our young people now, to understand what happened. Because you see, Dr. Andre raises what really happened to this desire for change, this desire for us to chart our own path, desire to help ourselves. Whatever happened to all of that? Why have we just, gone down this complacent thing that we just. So here's the thing. As you spoke about the question of COVID, and you did make a very good point that a few days ago we were saying, hey, we're the best in the world. We have it under control. I mean, we can teach everybody a thing or two. And then suddenly we find ourselves in this situation. But I'm not a scientist. Neither of us here are scientists. But there's too much of this thing going on. Everybody's trying to be a scientist. And everybody wants to put something on the table as if they have all the answers. But really, all I have is a little bit of common sense. I got that from Granby when I was growing up. A little common sense. I didn't take much schooling. But I mean, obviously, when I look on television, anybody who was looking at CNN over the last few months would have seen this guy called Andrew Cuomo sitting there every day before the people of New York. And you can see thousands of bodies in bags all over the place. They couldn't find place to put bodies. That is refrigerated 40-foot containers. They couldn't find homes, funeral homes, because they were too filled. They couldn't find burial places. They couldn't find family to even identify the people who were dead, the dead bodies. It was that bad. And everybody said, we need a vaccine, we need a vaccine, get us a vaccine. Then the vaccine comes and the deaths go down, the hospitalizations go down, the infections go down, everything goes down. And then I'm still hearing people say the vaccines are not working, the vaccines are not good, the vaccines are killing people. But then we're finding that 95, 96, 97% of the people that are now filling up the hospitals are unvaccinated. My common sense tells me that the vaccines are working. Now, Dr. George, I wanted to go over to you. So you certainly can turn on your mic so we can talk to you. Because I believe you want to tell us a little bit more before I go over to Gabriel Christian. Tell us a little bit more about the Caribbean Spring in the region. And Dr. You can see Dr. Andre saying is questioning Dominican psyche as to whether they're ready for that. You see it happening in the other countries, although they've had their stimulus, they still exercise their rights to demonstrate peacefully for what they need. Dr. George, let me go over to you now to take us through in the next segment.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Gregoire, and thank you for inviting me. I want to say good evening to my esteemed panelists, Dr. Andre and Attorney Christian, of course, Lambi and Sherwin, and of course, good evening to the listeners of QFM. Special good evening to Salisbury, and of course, as always, we want to invite the Holy Spirit in this conversation, the Holy Spirit being the fountain of all knowledge and wisdom. And so the last time we spoke, we identified two things. We identified one, massive protests and even the overturn of incumbent governments in the Caribbean. And of course, we looked at the activities that were taking place in some of the Caribbean islands, and particularly as it relates to the resistance against the seemingly mandated COVID-19 vaccines. But even before I move on to what I call tonight the Caribbean Spring Part B, I would like to open with a few comments from several persons. The first one is from Martin Luther King, and it says that darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. And hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. And that's Martin Luther King. The other one I thought that was interesting is from Colin Powell, the first African-American appointed Secretary of State of the United States. And he says, have a vision, be demanding. And the last one that really appeals to me is from the former President Barack Obama. He says, change will not come if we wait for other person or some other time. We are the ones that we have been waiting for. We are the change that we see. And that's Barack Obama. And sometime in this evening, I will mention why I like that one the most. That we are the change that we have been waiting for. And so tonight, I would like to take the conversation a step forward. Of course, I would like to, one, to examine the reasons behind the protests, the reason behind the disgust, the reason behind the overturn of some incumbent government. And to this, one want to look at the question, why? Why is that happening? The second thing I would like to do is to see whether there are any parallels in Dominica. Can we identify some parallels? And of course, I can mention a few in passing, notably the Salisbury protest and the assault on a sleeping village. Indeed, one can mention the bus drivers' protest and the threat of another protest. One can acknowledge the teachers at the college and their protests for safe working environment. And of course, there have been talks of police brutality and persons dying in police custody. And so even before we even have a cursory view of the Caribbean Spring, I want to start with a premise. And the premise is the idea that protest is part of a working democracy. Indeed, most democratic countries have enshrined in their constitution the saying that government shall not make laws respecting the establishment of religion. That simply means government cannot force you to attend a particular church. And of course, government cannot make laws that would abridge your freedom of speech, your freedom of press, the freedom to peacefully assemble, and the one I like the most, the freedom to petition the government for grievances. And so here we have that, and we know that. So when we look at the Caribbean Spring, of course, the advent of what's going on in the Caribbean, I think it makes sense to figure out why is this happening. So let's look at St. Lucia. What happened? Well, there were talks of the incumbent not providing the basic needs that St. Lucians felt that they needed. Indeed, with all due respect, these sentiments were expressed in calypsos. One of them, of course, is not airworthy, but it said something in patois, border something chashni, very, very, very rude calypsos. And so what is the point of saying that? Well, clearly, there was a massive rejection of the incumbent government. And so how did that happen? How did that happen? Well, the campaign started somewhere around December of 2020. And I mentioned that because it makes sense, because the election did not take place till the following year in May of 2021. But the point here is Dominica, what I recall, and I stand corrected, is there were talks that, I can call the election tomorrow, And I mentioned that because I do not think that's fair. And I think that speaks toward a need for constitutional reform where there ought to be fixed election date. By doing so, I think we can have what is called a fairer election. And that's why I mentioned that. But if we have to look at the St. Lucian case closer, we saw that the United Workers' Party, which is Shashni Party, the UWP, they nominated 17 candidates for all the 17 constituencies. And the opposition party nominated about 15. They did not send up 2 candidates where they thought, of course, the incumbent would have won. And the third party, which is the National Green Party, which is referred to as the NGP, they nominated 8 candidates. If we have to look at their platforms, the incumbent, the UWP, said that if they were given a second chance, they would reduce the VAT, the value-added tax. They said they would reduce that. They said that they would give health care for all citizens. They promised more food for the population and free textbooks. The Green Party said that they wanted constitutional reform and they wanted, of course, more food security. As it were, we got the result that the St. Lucian public massively rejected the incumbent, where they only won 2 seats and the opposition won 13 seats. And of course, the independent got 2. I say that because St. Lucia seems to be very active. And I will tell you why I mentioned that. They seem not dormant. They seem willing to petition their government. They seem willing, ready to change their government when the demands are not met. And so that deals with St. Lucia. The other country I will touch on in brief. The last time I went through the history of Cuba and so forth, I won't do that. The only thing I will say about Cuba is this, is that we are seeing protests. We are seeing, based on social media, police firing live rounds at citizens. And so why that is happening? It is happening because of course, the question of food security, the question of freedoms and liberties. And of course, many persons have a lot of respect for Cuba and their history. And I do share some of that ideology. But where people's freedom and their liberties are concerned, of course, Cuba is very questionable. To put quite frank, I think they rate very low in the Freedom House. And so, seemingly, if all things remain equal, for the first time in over 50 years, the Communist Party of Cuba might lose the coming election. Okay, Haiti. Of course, we're talking about the Caribbean Spring. Well, we saw what happened in Haiti. I mean, in July of 2018, there were massive protests. The reason, the why behind the protests was it was unsustainable. The fuel prices were extremely high and persons were suffering. I mean, a spread of poverty. And of course, the Haitians took to the street. What happened? I mean, this is very serious. What happened? 187 protesters killed. Interestingly, 44 police officers killed. And ultimately, what happened a month ago? They killed the president, assassinated. But we're talking about these things, and these are very uncomfortable, but it's real, and it's the truth. He was assassinated by 28 foreign mercenaries. What is even worse is his wife received several gunshots, who had to be flown to Miami to get medical attention. Luckily, she survived. Speaking of the Caribbean Spring, St. Vincent, I think Ralph Gonzalez is 74 years old, 2 years older than my mother. And when I saw the man bleeding with a stone to his head, trying to pass through over 200 protesters, it speaks to a bigger question. What is going on in the Caribbean? And so that brings us to the other Caribbean countries like Grenada. The songs that they're making about COVID, I don't support that. But I mean, it really shows that they're willing to petition their government. They're willing to fight for what they believe. Whether or not I support their position on COVID, but it speaks that they are ready to take action and they are demonstrating it. The very same can be said for Barbados. The very same can be said for Antigua. So the question becomes, what about Dominica? What are we willing to do? I mean, this evening I had a nice conversation with a cousin of mine from New York, and he heard about the upcoming launch of the NIDCLF. And he says he's willing to support. But he says, Dion, I'm not going to support and just give monies just like that, you know. People have to be willing to demonstrate that they're willing to put in their fair share as well. And so what can we say about Dominica? Do we see any similarities with what happened in Haiti, in St. Lucia, in St. Vincent? Of course, I don't want to repeat what I mentioned last week. But when I hear of course, what happened to my village, it cannot slip. It has not been resolved. And until it's resolved, it will be spoken about. But let's talk about the COVID virus. I heard Dr. Andre mention something about COVID virus. You know what struck me? When I saw in the last election, 2019, I thought Dominica had an international airport. I could be wrong, but I saw at least 4 planes in the airport. And if you have to ask about the budget that was spent on that campaign, my question is tonight, can we have these planes full of medical folks to come and assist in that crisis? This is a crisis not for Labour, not for UWP, not for freedom. This is a crisis that Dominica is facing. And so the people of Dominica ought to say, bring down loads of persons to come and help. And of course, the amount of monies that was spent on campaigns, use those monies and give us a stimulus now, right now. And so the other thing I think that is important to mention is recklessness. I was not there and I cannot say who sponsored the bike rally, nor can I assume that it's the bike rally. Possibly there was some spread. But if we are in a pandemic after all, and the law is that we ought not to have more than 50 people in us, why have all these activities by the bay or by the river? I mean, is it because a particular person sponsored it? Even worse, I heard on QFM recently, someone called and mentioned about their family not being treated properly in one of the COVID center sites. And someone else called and says, oh, that person might be victimized for saying that the government, I said, oh my God, that's not true. So you're telling me that if someone appeals to get help, medical attention for their family, and they're pleading and they're saying that they're not getting the help that they need, you're saying that there's a possibility that they might be victimized because they spoke, when I know the democracy that we seek toward is one that has freedom of expression, freedom of speech. Are you saying if I said that I do not like Barack Obama, that Barack Obama is going to take away my health care if I was receiving public health care? It cannot be, right? And so the last thing I want to touch on is what does that mean? This whole Caribbean Spring, this whole analysis, what does it mean? Well, I think it comes down to a fundamental question: good or bad governance? And so how do we make that judgment? Is it a subjective opinion because someone is politically biased that they would say it's a bad government? No. So I look at a political philosopher by the name of Aristotle. And Aristotle has a table where he has good and bad. And he has a government where it's a government by one, a government by few, and a government by many. Under the column of good, he has monarchy. It's not that I necessarily agree, but he's saying that monarchy cares for the people. Dictatorship, he says, is bad. Under the few, aristocracy, he said that's good, that they are wealthy and they are bright and they will help. The bad one, he says, oligarchy, where you have few guys perhaps in a family or in a military and they run the show, those that are in charge. Interestingly, he said polity is good and democracy is bad. Now, I'm not going to get into the intricacies of that, but there is an underlying theme I would like to touch on. And that theme is what makes a government good, what makes a government bad. And one of the common themes, according to the political philosophy of Aristotle, is good governments are accountable to their people. If the farmers tell you they need markets, if they tell you they need roads, if the bus drivers tell you they need a package, they cannot survive without it, the government find a way, at least meet with them and talk to them. The government don't say, I don't want to talk to NGOs. Oh, we should get rid. No. You should welcome NGOs. You should have a listening ear and says, this is what we're about. I hear your side. It might take me 3 months. It might take me 6 months, but I'm willing to work. That is what good government is about. And according to Aristotle, bad government is the one that says, not your business. Don't ask me anything. And this is according to a philosopher of political science that says good government has accountability to their citizens. The last thing I want to touch on, I think I will leave for later, but it's really important. And it's a question that says, can we predict what is going to turn out of this Caribbean Spring? Are there any implications for Dominica? And Mr. Gregoire, I think I will come back to that question later. Thank you.
Yes, and thanks a lot, Dr. George, for that. I see you actually went a long way and you built on what Dr. Andre had already established. It was a solid foundation there as regards the Caribbean Spring and also this the need for a stimulus. I believe it's a critical need, and that is something that I think we have to ensure that our government understands that they have to pay attention to, and the people are in need. And you made a very good point. A good government is one that is accountable to people, and it sees where the people have needs, and it meets the people's needs, not in the way of handouts and little things, but ensuring that people are able to take care of themselves. So there are a number of things that you've raised there. You raised the question of the freedom to petition governments. And I know that Gabriel Christian will have a lot of things to say about petitions and what especially young people can do in terms of petitions. So how petitions have worked successfully in the past, and now I'm sure he knows that they can work successfully again in the future. And the question you asked, what it is that Dominicans are willing to do? Are they willing to go the way of the St. Lucians and say, listen, we have to change our government from time to time. We can't just put a government there forever, and whether they produce or not, we just keep going because my great granduncle was supporting this particular regime. St. Lucians don't do that. St. Lucians say, listen, you know something, we're changing our government every 5 years if necessary. Barbadians don't do that. Antiguans don't do that. So, I mean, why is it? The question I think, Dr. Andre, and you asking, what is so different about Dominicans now? Dominicans never used to be that way before. All of a sudden, that complacency has set in as though mediocrity is the order of the day, and this is okay. I think Gabriel Christian will tell us that it is not okay. So as I go over to Gabriel Christian, I just wanted to say this, Gabriel, as you open your mic, that really and truly, one of the last things that Dr. George touched on was the question of NGOs. And we understand that our government said recently, or Prime Minister said recently, he has a problem with NGOs. Going to declare war on NGOs. I don't think he understands that NGOs are almost the total population. NGOs, all the unions, NGOs, the private sector organizations, NGOs, the churches, and in the organizations, NGOs, all of these people are NGOs. How do you get rid of NGOs? You're going to get rid of the population? So, Gabriel, Christian, give us a little bit more on all of what you have and your comments on what we're discussing here tonight. And let's go back to that. Just one thing I want to remind us, gentlemen. We will talk about what Command Sergeant Major Ralph Anthony calls Nidcliffe. We will talk about that later because that is an NGO that may be on the thread as well. And we don't want it to be because that's an NGO that wants to help everybody to do all the right things. Gabriel, Christian, over to you now.
Blessed good evening to you, Sheridan, and to my panelists, my fellow panelists, my brother by another mother, Dr. Irving Andre, Dion, George, who reminds me always of his beloved father, Brother Lambert, who is in the radio station, and Brother Norris. Sheridan, we spoke earlier this morning. I was in good humor, and we talked about the different things we talk about this evening. Around midday, I saw several photographs in my box about a death at the quarantine center. Somebody was being loaded into an ambulance. That was to change my day. Little did I know that that was the body of Kathleen, I believe Saint-Hilaire when I knew her. She was Abraham. She was the daughter of my sister-in-law's sister, Catherine Abraham, who you know. She was Dominica's first COVID victim. When I came home from graduating in 1986, my niece was being babysat by that young girl. My niece, Trudy Christian, whose father was my oldest brother, deceased Dr. Christian, who taught Colin McIntyre and all these guys before they went off to school. So today has been a sad day, and I want to send out condolences to her mother, Catherine, her husband, her family, my sister-in-law, Alicia, and Trudy. They are devastated because just recently we spoke about her condition. And so this is close and personal. I want to say in particular now, it also has to do with rule of law, because I'm reliably informed that the Prime Minister, who has been heard to say in the past, no law or constitution can prevent him from doing what he wants to do, did not quarantine when he returned. Mr. Prime Minister, is that true? Or is that just some figment of the imagination? I'm reliably informed that there were social events with the support, the guidance, the sponsorship of senior members of the ruling party. Mr. Prime Minister, are those statements or are those reports true? Because if it is in fact the case that we are trying to manage a pandemic, and the people who are charged with enforcing the law, upholding the law, guiding the citizenry in complying with the law, are they themselves the ones breaching the law? By their conduct, they pose a present and imminent danger to the health and general welfare of the citizenry of the Commonwealth of Dominica. And we will continue to see the rise, unfortunately, in infections until and unless, of course, the government that is in charge shows the appropriate example in its conduct as to what should and should not be done. So again, our condolences and our concern extends to all Dominicans who are now under threat because of the lawless behavior of folks in high and some in low places. Let me now move along to addressing some of the wisdom shared by Brother Irving. Brother Irving is a scholar of great stature who has shown gratitude for the life of Rosie Douglas by taking time away from his very important work as a judge to pen a masterpiece of gratitude in the historical context. He referenced the lepers in the Bible I think Jesus treated 10 of them, Brother Sheridan. I know you're a good acolyte, you know those things. But supposedly only one returned to say thank you. Has this government that we now have in power, which was brought into office by Brother Ruzi, made manifest his humility, made manifest his generosity of spirit, made manifest his absolute disdain for the trappings of power? Let me tell your listening audience someone about the Brother Ruzi that our good brother here, Irving Andrew, wrote about. In 2000, Brother Ruzi called me and asked me to be ambassador to the United States. And he said, come to Portsmouth. And I boarded the state car. And from the time we left the ministerial building to Portersville, Brother Ruzi fell asleep on my shoulder. And so I pushed him a little bit and he woke up. And as he woke up, he saw a lady walking down the street with a bag, a crocker's bag. Maybe she had some provisions. He tapped the driver and said, wait, hold on. He bent out through the window and asked the woman where she was going and invited her into the car. He dropped her from Pottersville at around where we had Hayden store there, all the way to Fonkule. And after he dropped the woman off, the police officer, I think, was grumbling. He said, listen, this is taxpayers' money. You know? This is the state car. So if the state car cannot pick up a citizen of the state, I don't know what the state car is. That was Rosie Douglas. That was Rosie Douglas. Are we possessed now of a government that resembles that kind of conduct, that kind of service? Thank you, Irving Andre. I want to express gratitude to you, sir, for taking the time, the many sleepless nights, the prodigious effort unearthing gems from the archives of the court case in Montreal, at the time in Canada, at the time in Dominica. So Dominicans who are now 20 years old, they wouldn't know Rosie Douglas. But they must give thanks to Irving Andre for adding something to the circumference of our knowledge. Let me address our brother, Dion. Spoke about Aristotle. Well, Dion, in the days of Aristotle, we didn't have popular democracy as we do today. Aristotle, as you know, presided over a slave state. But he did talk about the republic. But the main thing is to remember the Lincolnian sort of summary of what democracy means. Democracy in the Lincolnian summary was government of the people, for the people, by the people. And that's what he said at the Gettysburg Address. He also believed in dialogue, meaning we have what we have here, a conversation, a rapport between the citizenry and the leadership. When the Prime Minister made the first curfew or the first lockdown, did he use Zoom or Google Meets or anything to have a town hall meeting with the opposition and civil society to empanel people who are skilled in public health matters, to get some feedback from the business sector, from the farmers, from the fisher folk, to elicit from them what they thought, so that whatever government eventually did was resembling in some way a participatory democracy with a feedback cycle that allowed for government to be in its policy, pronouncements, and protocols reflective of the popular will. Did he do that, Dion George? Did you do that, Brother Lambie? Did you do that, Sheridan Gregoire? Dr. Andre, you're in Canada, you may have missed it. I'm reliably informed that he did not. I'm reliably informed in the last instance when they did the curfew, whatever, the farmers were not even considered. C'est ça, c'est parti la bouée. Ça, c'est parti la bouée. Is that the party of the laboring classes that they did not even have the common decency to have found out from the fisher folk and from, because, you know, poisson, cassati, depuis plus temps passé, poisson ça, sati a kaila. That's cruel to me. And if time passes, that fish is going to smell. Am I making sense? The reality is, did they sit down and say, well, you know what, garçon, il a abordé, ça c'est gouvernement pour Mali, oui. Let us sit with the people and find out what is the best way to handle this. We're a small country, Sheridan. We're not 1 billion people like in China or in India. You know. We are 70, 80,000 people. If you put the Asians, maybe a little more. Did they do that? the same sort of despotic orientation, the same sort of dictatorial orientation. They just put the thing in place and then, oops, they forgot. Because, you know, agricultural produce without refrigeration, very, very time sensitive in way of its ability to be edible. They said, well, I think let's open it up a little bit. That kind of shambolic, incompetent, despotic management of affairs must and will come to an end, because people are fed up now. They see that they have a government which pretends at being charitable by giving a few crumbs late at night in a brown paper bag, passing around and handing out a little back and neck here and there to party supporters, that will stop the deluge of disgust at the way in which our country is being mismanaged. Let me share this with you, Sheridan, and our friends at home and abroad. Why is it that at a time when this government has sold 23,950 passports, they cannot settle on a stimulus package for all the citizens of the country? This works out to be about $60,000 per citizen if you calculate the $4.2 billion they have. And it's for that reason we are happy to say that Dominicans at home and abroad have gotten together to form a Civil Liberties Foundation, the Nature Island Democracy and Civil Liberties Foundation, so that we can begin to ensure that our people are made aware of their democratic rights, our Constitution is protected, our freedom of association is protected, our freedom of thought is protected, our media is protected, our people are protected from police brutality, where our police force is increasingly lawless and people are being killed, Sheridan, in police custody. Is that the country we have? Do we have a citizens complaint board where a citizen can complain against the police? And after all of those monies, we have the New York Post today, Dominicans. The New York Post today, August 17th, 2021, is advertising in the New York Post. Villas have been sold in Dominica for $1.45 million through one Gregoire Nassif. Who is Gregoire Nassif? I know him to be someone who's a businessman in Dominica. I know him to have a hotel. I have seen articles written by him in fierce defense of the Prime Minister. Why is Gregoire Nassif in such fierce defense of the Prime Minister? Did he get a stimulus package? Did any of those passport money funds find their way into the villas that are being sold through the New York Post? August 17th, 2021? Mr. Nassif, it'd be good for you to come on Q95 and explain to us how this works, because I'm thinking myself, if the passport of Dominica is a state resource, and I give the state resource to an agent to sell, I understand that agent must get a commission for his work. But the balance of that money should then be lodged after his commission in the consolidated fund, because the passport is a state asset. Therefore, the monies from the passport primarily should be likewise a state asset. And in civilized countries where people are taken care of and they're not despotic in a way of leadership, like in Norway and other countries, Singapore, for instance, they set up what is called a national trust fund. And those monies are then invested for the benefit of the entire society. They are not benefited, or they are not made to benefit, rather, simply an elite, an oligarchy, or a select few. So Mr. Nassif and others who have properties that have benefited from the passport program, please come in and explain to the citizens where the public interest is being protected and how this works. And on that point, Sheridan Gregoire, one of the first things that our organization ought to do and should do is to do a petition asking citizens at home and abroad to petition this government for full disclosure via a Dominica Public Information Act. What is a Public Information Act? Well, in Maryland, as the attorney for a city on the DC border, I have had to respond to letters from the Washington Post and from civic organizations asking the following: how much money does the mayor earn? What are emoluments, meaning what are her benefits? How much money does the chief of police earn? What are his emoluments? That is, what are his benefits? What are the contracts that the city have entered into in the past fiscal year? With whom are those contracts entered? How much it is are paid on each of those contracts? Were any of those contracts subject to competitive bidding? That is how a real 21st century democracy works. In Dominica today, we have a $1 billion airport project being let to one man and his company. What is that company, Sheridan, Gregoire? Have you heard of that company, Dion, George? Judge Andre, I cannot ask you that question. You're far away from the field. Maybe Lambert may know. I'm reliably informed that that company is Montreal Management. Where have we heard that name before? Isn't that the same Montreal Management that built the mansion that the Prime Minister is staying in for $64,000 a month and no stimulus package for the average Dominican? Verily I say unto you, my brethren, verily I say unto you, my sister, is that a government that is showing gratitude for the legacy of Rosie Douglas and his humility and his aversion to materialism and high living? Where was Rosie's mansion? His mansion resides in the hearts of men and women who love freedom and justice. Where is Prime Minister Scarrett's mansion? It's on a hill with a wall that is clad, I am reliably informed, with tiles. I'm reliably informed there's another mansion. It resides on Victoria Street across from the library where I met Irving Andre in 1976, thereabouts, where we were perusing the history of the world, an interesting knowledge that still has us bounded together in a common bond of destiny and love of country. Irving Andre has done every single book that he has done about Dominica, born of love of country and patriotic ardor and desire to make sure that our people are not dumbed down, denied the knowledge of the history. In 20 years, 18 by Scarrett, not one book has this government done to tell us who was Phyllis Alfrey, founder of the Labour Party. Not one book have they done to tell us who was Isidro Black, founder of the Labour Party. The man from Viecas has not done one book, commissioned one book to tell us who Edward Oliver LeBlanc was, first chief minister of a Labour Party government, the man who brought us associated statehood. Well, forget about Patrick John and O.J. Serafin. Who are these people? They don't know them. But this is a quality of service that they render to those who paved pathways, carved a road to power for them. And in their ingratitude and their narcissism and their self-love and idolatry and vainglorious adherence to that which is about greed and personal profiteering and self-aggrandizement, they have forgotten that they are there to serve the people. So 3 things. Non-governmental organizations, you may ask, what are they? They are the Red Cross. They are the 4-H clubs. They're the Boy Scouts. The Boy Scouts taught us always be prepared. They also taught us honesty. Lambi shaking his head is the best. What? Policy. Do we have an honest government? Well, if we have an honest government, then let us have this. Prime Minister Scarrett, tonight I invite you, sir, to come on tomorrow on the Anupali Intelligent Business Program and tell us, sir, who are the people with whom you have signed agreements for the sale of passports. Give us their names. Give us their addresses. Give us their phone numbers so that Dominicans who have phones, and I am reliably informed that many Dominicans have phones, they even have something called email and internet and so on, I'm not sure if that's true, can contact those people and ask them, what are they doing on behalf of Dominica? And for each of those agents, we want to know how much money in passport sales they've made in the past time that they have served. If it's 5 years, we want to have the total income over those 5 years. If it's 10 years, we want to have the total income. And that goes for Alec Lawrence as well. And it goes for those in Dubai as well. It goes for those in China. It goes for those who own the Fortune Hotel and Secret Bay and Jungle Bay and all bays in and outside Dominica. We want to know why, because you're selling a state asset. In a modern democracy, we need to have the public in a position to access information on the matters being done in their name. Mr. Prime Minister, tomorrow on your Anu Pale Intelligent Business Program, tell us about the MOU with China. What is in it? Publish it in the Gazette. We also want to have the names of all the persons with whom you contracted to build the apartment buildings. How much were those contracts per unit? How much were they paid? Were the contracts competitively bidded out? Did we have public tender? Irving and I were together in Dominica in 2017, and we went to what used to be the Green Parrot. Someone said it's now called the Cart Wheel or the Wheel of Carts. I'm not sure what it is. It's a restaurant in town. And we met Jackie Dupini. And Jackie Dupini showed us a paper from 1824. She had a binder with all newspapers. And this one is from 1824. Irving, you can shake your head and let me know you remember that. Gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, Dominicans at home and abroad, in that newspaper on the front cover, it said, and I quote, "The commissary at the barracks at Mont Bruce hereby issues a tender to all bakers in Roseau for the supply of bread for the troops at the Mont Bruce barracks." 1824, under colonial rule, open tender for things as simple as bread. We're in 2021. The biggest construction project in the history of Dominica, and not one tender. It goes to one man from the Middle East using a false name or a name that's not his real name. For all I know, his name may be Mohammed Ali Baba or Osama bin Laden. And Dominicans are sitting there. Where are architects with their mouths white for want of work? Where are our masons with their trowels in their back pockets for want of work? Where are our truckers? Where are our engineers? Disgraceful. That is not what Irving Andrew and I fought for as independence-minded students in the 1970s. That is not what Rosie Douglas died for, bringing forth a government that today has betrayed his every interest to build up Dominica and Dominicans with pride and joy and dedication to the dignity of our people. That is not the legacy of Rosie Douglas, of Edward Oliver LeBlanc, even Eugenia Charles, I dare say. No, this is treachery of the highest order. And so the time has come now. We have a pandemic, we know that. We're asking our Dominicans to obey a protocol, take the vaccine where vaccines are, in fact, in place. I believe in the scientific method. Please don't get distracted. Let's focus on the matter at hand. The matter at hand is our national survival. And it means that the monies of Dominica must be made available to Dominicans and not fly-by-night pirates of the Caribbean. Like those who get no-bid contracts, they're not accountable to anyone, and they have their monies overseas. Let's bring that money back into the consolidated fund, and let's pay a stimulus package, and let's pay it now. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening.
So,
Let us get our people on this line.
So, Brother Gable, thank you very much for that. Now, we're going to go to the telephones because we promised our listeners that we'll go to the telephone. So, Lambi, get set for you to give them the numbers so our listeners can make a few calls to join us and give with us here tonight. But here's the thing. I think the question that I heard from Dr. Andre, the question I heard from Dr. Dion George, and the question I heard from Brother Gabriel Christian is, what are Dominicans willing to do to stand up for their rights, to get their piece of the pie? I mean, are they just satisfied with getting nothing? What Dr. Andre said, was it I saw some videos going around, some pictures going around on the internet of a truck loaded with some paper bags with some groceries in it. Is that what Dominicans want, and why other people are controlling $4 billion to do all kinds of things? This is what Dominicans are willing to settle for? Are they not willing to at least take a step like the St. Lucians and say, listen, if we can have what we need, we're going to do something about it? Are they not willing to take a step, let's take a stand like people in Guyana did, like the people in St. Lucia done, in Antigua are doing, and so on? What are Dominicans willing to do to help themselves? That's the question. Maybe as we go to the telephones, Lambi, be sure that we can hear the callers when they call, and you get in the number. Maybe some of our callers will tell us what it is that they're prepared to do to stand up for their rights. Because, we have a democracy, and in a democracy, people are entitled to stand for their rights and peacefully demand their rights and petition the governments to get the rights. Let's go over to you, Lambi. Let's take a few calls if we have some people who want to take a call.
Numbers are 449-3095, 449-3097, 616-4257. The overseas access number is 305-432-9624. Let me repeat this again. Numbers are 449-3095-9697, 616-4257, 305-432-9624, and we are taking your calls right now, and there is someone on the overseas line. Caller, please go ahead.
And Mr. G and the rest of this little panel. Mr. G, I heard Dr. George talk about good governance, and one of the ways you could tell a government is good, that they have to be accounted to the people. And I give him an A for that. But when one is elected, before you take office, you have to take an oath. And that oath is to uphold the laws and the constitution of Dominica in that case. And on this basis alone, I think Roosevelt Skerrit needs to go. Because he doesn't uphold the laws and the constitution of Dominica, and that is one of his first objectives. We hear about the extension of the curfew, for example, today. To extend that curfew beyond the date the president signed it for, the emergency, a state of emergency. He has to go back to Parliament. And he didn't go back to Parliament and stay in where I don't know if his vacant or in his mansion. And so what I'm saying is that to have good governance, you must uphold the laws and the constitution of the state. Thank you, Lambi. I'll make it short because I know a lot of people. Good show, Brother Gabriel. I got you. Thank you, Lambi. Thank you, Mr. G.
You're welcome.
Still taking your calls. The numbers are out there. Please make your calls right now. Caller, please go ahead.
Very nice to welcome you on board. Collapse government implementing policies, warfare, force against the COVID-19, and even threat to shut down the world transaction. Brother Lambi, you can see the brutal reaction of government businesses. The question is whether we can survive without the leadership of government. You understand me? Hello?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Me?
Please go ahead.
Look, I mean, they're talking about the warfare against the COVID and even shutting down the world. But the question is now whether we can survive without the leadership of government. We can survive, so they can shut down the world. It will not shut down. It will continue running because people will always continue running and hungry men looking for food, and they will always be killed. So that will not affect only, it will affect governments, people. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, sir. Numerous calls coming in. Go ahead, please, caller.
Yes, good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
Right, Mr. Gregoire.
Yes, go right ahead.
Listen to you guys rather attentively. Christian, Mr. Gregoire, Dominica, not a
Let me give us a little more volume on the call.
one. Hello?
Yeah.
Oh,
Keep going, caller.
Yes, go ahead. Keep going, caller. Any calls coming in?
yeah. Yeah, Dominica is like today. For permanent secretary representing your government and the government of Dominica, telling people that they're going to have lockdown this coming week, and the reason for the lockdown because the frontline workers need a break so they can go home. And what rubbish is that? I was a fire officer in Dominica in the time of Christian died. When we had a state of emergencies, we didn't go and have a break. That woman must have been the paper, and she just read what was on. She read what was on it. Doesn't have the common sense to know talking of nonsense. Dominica got money to keep of Dominica a package from the IMF. Yeah, you guys talking about got about $10 million US. All the other islands, government got money from the stimulus. Did the government of Dominica steal that money? Or like my dear brother Kobe, that the government stole the money? Thank you, gentlemen.
And you're very welcome. Lambi, when you take the rest of the calls, try to give us a little bit more volume on the calls because we're not hearing the callers that well. So you must want to open up the mic a little bit so we can hear the port a little, so we can hear the callers much better. Let's keep going, Lambi. If you have some more calls, let's take them.
Go ahead, caller.
Yes, good evening, my brothers. Good evening.
Yes, good evening.
This is the first time I'm calling that program. I guess Dion should know who's that voice. It's a voice he should know very well. I need to say to you all, I'm listening. But, I just need to say something quickly as to that announcement that was made by that young lady. You have a war to win. Your country is going to war, or your country is at war with the enemy. And you are saying to the country, we need to give the soldiers a break to have them sleep and, well rest again to go back and fight while the enemy is out there firing at your troops or at your country. You have a war to win, but there you have your announcement that the people need, the soldiers need rest. So therefore, whatever happens on the weekend, we are only doing it because the soldiers need rest. While that pandemic is just ravaging Dominica. My brother, I love the fact that you all could talk about democracy. But let me just say to you all, as a little local young man just trying to survive in the country, Dominica has lost its democracy. There's no point we look for an event. We look for a shadow when the event is already on us. When a man in the middle of a COVID time, a prime minister, a leader of a country in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of a crisis, can take for himself $64,000 of the treasury to live in a mansion, which he have how many mansions? You all forget to mention the mansion in Jacobs. He also has a mansion in Jacobs, and he told Dominicans it was going to cost him just about $400,000. We keep forgetting. My brother, let us not even talk about democracy in Dominica anymore. We are not in a democracy, Dominica. We see a little stimulus package among the many that was not given to Dominicans, were given to the bus drivers, and they were beaten for it. They took blows. So are you saying that the people should go on the street to take blows again to get a stimulus package? Well, it needs to be. That is how I see it going, because you need to go and take blows from the laws, from the powers that be, and from our policemen that are behaving like tutu makuts now for Roosevelt's character. We need to go and take blows. Go on the streets and take blows to get a stimulus package, because it seems there's a punishment attached to Dominica's stimulus package, and it's unfortunate. It's really unfortunate, and it's rather sad. Again, I'm listening. G, I'm saying good night to you again, and good night to the other panelists. Keep doing what you all are doing. I believe and I am convinced you are on the right side. And when you're on the right side, nothing will go wrong. Yes, good night again. I'm listening.
I want to thank that caller a lot for that comment and that interjection there. And Dion, of course, I mean, I expect that you will address the callers, you respond to the caller, and when you come. Lambi, you want to take a couple more calls before we move on?
Yes, we are. We're taking a few more calls. Caller, please go ahead. Caller one, not there. On the overseas line, please go ahead. All right, that wasn't clear. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I didn't hear that at all.
That wasn't clear at all. Okay, I think you can move on until we get some more calls.
Well, let's go on. I mean, there were a number of calls that we got here already, that there are a number of points that were made, and I'm pretty sure that as we go along, we'll address them. Lam, you want to take one more before we move on?
Yes. Caller, please go ahead.
Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
You know, it is very, very, very sad to see exactly the state at which the governance of Dominica is, you know. And there are still many Dominicans who say, we like it so. which is so sad. Can you imagine this situation is happening in Dominica? All those situations happening in Dominica. I mean, when you listen to the cabinet secretary, somebody who's supposed to be highly educated, who should know a lot about administration or the good running of government, good governance. And a lot of people are concluding that she has in fact read what she was given, without even maybe scrutinizing what she had in her hand, and just went out and said it. If that is what happened, I wonder how is she feeling now when people who are less educated than her can conclude or have concluded that she was given a piece of paper in her hand, did not scrutinize it, and just went out and read it. Now, who exactly does it impact on? Is it she, or is it the political people in government? Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks
sir.
a lot. Thanks a lot, Colin.
On the overseas line, please go ahead with your call.
Yes, Lambi. I'd like to say good evening to you and the panel, and most importantly to Sheridan. I want to thank you for doing what you do, my friend. You have the Giants on there tonight, and I tuned in late, and I heard Gabriel, and I want to say thank you, Gabriel, because what you just did, from what I heard, it put a joy in my heart. This is Mr. Rossico. I'll let you know who is calling. I ain't afraid of nobody.
Well, yes, and I have to tell you too that I got so much blows last week for not having Dr. Andre. See, we have him here tonight, and everybody's happy, right?
Sheridan, I understand where the hearts and the minds of the people are.
Right.
Because I'm a layman, and I understand how a layman speaks. But I can stand in a boardroom and understand how the boardroom speakers speak, because I try to educate myself on every level. And with the intelligent gentlemen that you have in there with you tonight, the people need to hear that too, because we need to have both sides, the top, the bottom, and the middle. And from what I heard when I tuned in and I heard Gabriel is bringing to the people the urgency of where we are, because I don't think most people, educated and non-educated alike, understand the urgency of where Dominica is today, because there are a lot of unseen and unearthed that we know not of. And this is the scary part about the country. I feel many times in my heart, and I will tell you, in the wee hours of the morning, sometimes I'll get up, first thing come to mind is Dominica and where the country is at and where it's going. And my thoughts sometimes is not the best, and it keeps me awake for a while until I sit and think and fall asleep again. And this is what I'm trying to say, what Gabriel did. I did not hear Dr. Irving or the others. As soon as I turned on, because I was sitting on Occupy with Government, I heard Gabriel. And I just want to say thank you to Gabriel, and thank you to Sheridan for having this format on a weekly basis and bringing to people the information. But our people must start listening and listen with caution, comprehend what you hear. Because this kind of thing that we are dealing with right now, everybody is preoccupied with COVID, but Dominica has a bigger problem than COVID, my brother. Yes, COVID is serious, but COVID will go away sooner or later. But that problem that we have with this illegal activity taking place with our sovereignty, with our resources, the way our country is being controlled by a few, it's a long, long-term problem if it is not conquered. And this is why I say I don't think that people understand the urgency of where we are. COVID will go away. And I just want to say that because many times I say on the radio, I'm not a person who likes to complain. But this show tonight has an idea of a solution, what we need to do, where we need to go. And these are the shows that we need to bring forward. We need to have solution-oriented programs and not just a pity party where everybody calls and complains, because we need to get out of this quagmire. Thank you very much, Sheridan.
Well, yes, and thanks a lot for your call as well. I mean, we highly appreciate your contribution here. Lambi, and we will respond. I mean, I'm sure that when I go to Dr. Irving Andre, he will want to respond to some of the very salient points that have been made by the callers. Lambi, you want to take another call before we move on?
Yes, let's take this final call in this segment. Caller, please go ahead.
Yes, good evening to the panel.
Good evening.
Yes, we have a bishop in Dominica. With all what is going on in the country, you're not hearing nothing from the bishop. He's not saying nothing with all the guns they take in parliament towards the opposition, nothing from him. Anytime you hear this man opens his mouth and talk, only thing you hear from him is about injection. The man is not saying nothing. Man don't care about Dominicans, whether he's dying, whether he's suffering. All he's talking about is the COVID injection. That's all he's talking about. Right? But as far as I heard that he's from St. Lucia, and to me, the man don't care about Dominicans, whether he's sick or not, because Kerry gave him $500,000 for the Catholic Church sometimes back there. And the man don't care about Dominicans. All he knows is getting money from Kerry. And that's all. Thank you.
Yes, and thanks a lot for that. I think maybe we can take a break from the calls now, and I want to go back to Dr. Andre. See, there's so many different things that one of the things I found in particular that stood out for me in some of the contributions that the callers are making is there is a concern that Dominica is losing its democracy. And there is a concern about the whole question of what it is that we're doing, the urgency of the need for action. I mean, people are not saying this, but I know they're hurting from the lack of a stimulus in this very, very difficult situation. And I think people are saying, what is it our government is doing for us? But then some people are saying, listen, we no longer have a democracy. This government is doing whatever they want. And people seem to be afraid to petition the government to stand up for their rights, like some of the other countries are doing. And I'm hoping, Dr. Andre, that you can, in fact, talk to us about it, because I do not think that Dominicans want to lose the democracy. And certainly, if you turn on your mic, I think you will want to suggest that there's something that we can do about it to ensure that we can preserve and protect and continue our democracy. So if you can put on your mic, Dr. Andre, appreciate that, so you could contribute now.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, we're hearing you very well.
Okay, wonderful. Well, look, the fact of the matter is, first of all, there are certain constitutional provisions that are designed, or the purpose of which is to the preservation of the democracy. For example, the whole question of an ombudsman, an ombudsperson, I should say, an ombudsperson who would act as the protector of the citizenry against any capricious acts of the government. That is enshrined in the Constitution. The whole question of checks and balances. What we have a situation right now is the conspicuous absence of some of those institutions that would preserve the essence of our democracy. Gabriel Christian alluded to one of these types of institutions, civilian oversight of this law enforcement agencies. I have made reference to the absence of an ombudsman. I have not made mention, but there's no whistleblower legislation. The whole question as to the accountability of those who hold office, again, is conspicuous by its absence. What about the integrity in public commission? I mean, the whole thing is a joke. What about the whole question of the electoral commission? Persons stand in conflict of interest positions insofar as that institution is concerned, at least some or a few of the members. So what we have really is a manifestation or every piece of evidence that all is not well in the state of Dominic, that in terms of governance, we have fallen by the wayside. We build with blocks from sand derived from the sea. And as you know, sand from the sea are inherently weak because they corrode over time. So that is what our institutions are. Homes built from sands scavenged from the sea. We're in a situation, unfortunately, where, quite frankly, you have our leadership acting as if it is part of the family estate that they're governing, that they decide who eat, they decide who drink, and unfortunately, they decide who die. Because the fact of the matter is that significant increase in infection from the 31st of July to now is not God's will. It is the result of a certain type of cavalier and capricious attitude towards the welfare and well-being of people. That is the bottom line. That is what we face. God didn't wish Dominica would face this crisis today. You see, it's unfortunate, you know, that most of us, we jump on the God bandwagon when things go wrong. But we only jump on the God bandwagon as to hide our own actions and inaction. And quite frankly, if our leaders, whether religious or otherwise, cannot call a spade, then it calls into question the very nature of that leadership. Is the nature of the leadership one to simply legitimize a kind of capricious action in terms of the welfare of the citizenry? Or is the justification, or is the leadership their task to identify those things that have gone wrong? To say loudly and boldly, God should not and will not be mocked. He will not tolerate this. You know, to be a vision not only for Catholics, but for Dominicans, for Christians. To engage the better being, the better spirit of them. To encourage them that they can do better, that they should not just accept the failings as if it was preordained. That is the essence of leadership, to set the example. To set the example. We all know the effects of COVID. There's no mystery. We saw what happened in the States. Were we not moved by the sight in Brazil of hundreds and hundreds of freshly dug graves with bodies lined up to be dumped into those graves because there was no time to grieve? Were we not affected by images in India of hundreds of thousands of funeral pyres with grieving family members? Were we not moved by persons dying in Mumbai or wherever, mere feet from a hospital, fighting their way to a hospital and dying a few steps away from the entrance? Were we not grieved by the sight of persons fighting for bottles of oxygen just to preserve their own life? We knew all that before, and yet, even before the crisis, we'd put it past us. We started celebrating. We started celebrating. And what was in that Trojan horse of celebration? The vaccine. Now we've gotten what we worked for. The death of a young person, unfortunately. And God forbid, now we can pray in earnest, because we should be praying and hopefully acting that there are no more deaths. But again, this is not an accident. This is not something God preordained. This is the result of a certain cavalier and callous approach to government. That is what we had to deal with. And the question is that what we have to accept? Is that the best that we can expect in terms of those who govern? Is the question.
Thank you, Dr. Andre. But I think we cannot accept that, I mean, one death is too many. I mean, we cannot accept that. I mean, Dominicans have to decide what they're going to accept and what they're not going to accept. I mean, you're quite right. I heard the government boasting that, hey, we have this thing under control, no deaths. We are down to 1 or 2 positive cases. Hey, but suddenly you find feds all over the place. And then you're right. Somebody has to take responsibility for it. I mean, whoever financed those feds or approved of them or allowed them, they are responsible. I mean, look what has happened now. I don't want to place any blame for the death of this young lady, but I mean, this is really too much. I mean, how many more young people have to die before we ask ourselves a question and change our attitude? Dr. Dion, George, I'm going to come to you because maybe you can contribute to some of that, because certainly I don't believe the caller who called and talked about our democracy, that is not what the caller wants. He does not want us to lose our democracy. He's alerting us that it looks like we are on the brink, because you see the way things are happening, the way decisions are being made. I mean, as we see again, look, $4-point-something billion outside, and we have little paper bags of stuff on trucks handing out to whoever want in the dead of night. I mean, come on, is that while other people are getting $1 billion and $2 billion to do all kind of things? Come on, is that what Dominicans are going to stand by and accept as the new order, the new way of life? So people are going to be, we see the videos all the time of extremely poor people in Dominica. Why these people have to be so poor when the island is so rich in resources? You have $4 billion out there. Why should anybody be poor? Nobody should be poor and waiting for handouts. Dr. Dion, George, maybe you can help us out with some of that here.
Yes, Sheridan. On a previous show once, I addressed some what is called psychological mechanisms of leaders. And one of the risks that some people take, it's called groupthink. And say, for example, you're a member of the United Workers' Party. Whatever the United Workers' Party do, oh, it's good, it's good, it's good. And whatever the Labour Party do, if you're a supporter of that party, then it's good. And those who sometimes challenge that groupthink, they are ostracized, they are pushed off, and they are seen as being, we cannot have that when we have a pandemic that is facing a nation. Please, this is not about, oh, it's a good job, oh, the government is trying their best. Come on, man. There is good, and according to Dr. Andre, is it the optimal? Can it be better? And it cannot be such that we are moving with the tide. We have to talk about good government policy. And of course, none of us here are medical doctors, but the government has to create an environment where there is a policy that would, Dr. Andre said, we saw all the deaths in Brazil, in New York, in Italy. And here we are saying, oh, good job, lowest COVID. Man, I love Dominica. All of us do. But we have to have policies, not just moving with the wave. Now we are in that situation there. It's really sad. I wish the best. And I really sincerely hope that the government can get a grip on it. And earlier on, when I alluded to the idea that Melvin Hall Airport should be filled with planes with medical assistance, I'm serious. And of course, when I alluded to the idea that the kind of campaign financing that they had, some of that perhaps should be directed to giving a stimulus package right now for suffering Dominicans. To the point of the caller, I think I recognize his voice. I think that's my countryman, Bob. He's right on point with the whole idea that we ought to be living in a constitutional democracy. But if I recall, perhaps maybe not exactly, but I think the Prime Minister one time says that no law, no constitution can prevent him. And so that leads me to the other caller, which I think I also recognize his voice. I think that's my good friend, Mr. William. He says, and it's very interesting point, and I don't want to forget it. He says, consider what we're talking about. Tonight, we're on a program talking about the better way forward for Dominica. And he said, yes, he agrees, but consider what happened to the bus drivers when they protested. And I just remembered, I saw live videos of police kicking, punching, and they grouped up against a bus driver and dragged the guy. Got so much blows, he passed out. And so the caller is making a good point. But to his point, I want to remind him of a quote that I started with. And it's the quote that says that change will not come if we wait for some other person or some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the change that we see. And I mention that because what history has shown and what political scientists have studied, even as we have seen in countries like Egypt, like Yemen, like Saudi Arabia, like Iraq, is no matter how brutal a dictator is, no matter how autocratic it is, when the people rise up, more often than not, government falls. And so it might not be one fight, it might not be two fights, but if there is a effort where, like in St. Lucia, people said that they're fed up and they need help. This is not about UWP or Labour. Dominicans need help. Mr. Gregoire, if I'm doing something wrong, please don't say, man, Dion is my partner. No, tell me the truth. Tell me the truth so I can do better. So not because, okay, this is your party, you're going to say, nah, man, we're doing a good job. Well, leave him alone. Nah. If it can be better, tell him where it can be better so that the country can prosper. And so I want to tell the caller, have faith. In fact, I will leave him on that note. It's called dialectic materialism. It's a theory from Karl Marx, who basically looked at what we're experiencing right now. It was kind of written during the Industrial Revolution. And essentially what he put toward is where you have the haves and the have-nots. He referred to the haves as the bourgeoisies and the have-nots as the proletariats, the upper class and the lower class. He says a time will come where the lower class will reach a point of class consciousness and they will rise up and they will overthrow that elite group. And so we have seen that in governments over governments over governments. And that leaves me with my last point, a fundamental question. What should Dominican do? What should Dominican do? Well, what has St. Lucia done? Oh, God forbid, no one is even suggesting what happened in Haiti. We rebuke that. But are there elements of disgust? Today, someone sent me a WhatsApp, and a guy bathing in a river, and he sang a song. He says, down by the river, I'm going to lay down my burdens, something to that effect. And then he said that if it's not COVID that will kill him, he will die of stress and poverty, expressing his dissatisfaction and the pain that he's feeling. And I know he's not the only one. I bet you supporters of the government, they are feeling it as well. And so now is the time to have not a blame game, but an honest conversation as to where we are as a people. Face to face, and can we do better? And Mr. Gregoire, I think I will stop on that point. Thank you.
And thanks a lot, Dion, for that. But really and truly, as I go to Gabriel Christian, I have to say, Gabriel, I have of the firm conviction that I like democracy. Democracy should stand in Dominica. And Dominicans have to do everything in their power, and they have a lot of power because the people always have the power to ensure that they have their democracy. If they want an ombudsman, they should get an ombudsman. If they want the IPO to be, they should have a proper IPO. If they want a proper electoral commission, they should have a proper electoral commission. We've discussed all those things in some detail. But the fact of the matter is, Gabriel, it is unacceptable for anyone to think that they have a good government or there is good governance if you have $4 billion outside and you have this rank poverty in the country. You cannot give it where other countries are giving their people 1 and 2 stimulus packages, and people are crying now because they have the need. I've heard the women, the female farmers calling and crying and complaining. They need a stimulus. This money out there, this $4 billion, is their money. As you said, it is the state assets that derive this money. It's the people's money. Why can't we just bring the people's money and then give it to the people who need it now? Gabriel, you give us some of your wisdom on this thing. So you need to open your mic so that you can talk to us. Boy, I think we should go from here.
Sheridan, before I say anything, I want to express again my gratitude to you and Sherwin and the other gentleman and Brother Dion and Irving. On Friday, I believe it is, Irving will be launching Rosie Douglas, Fearless Fighter for Freedom. And in this moment of great threat to the health and welfare of our people, the survival of our nation, I ask myself, what would Rosie Douglas do? In this moment of great threat to the survival of our nation, I ask, what would Mike Douglas do? These were two labor rights, two labor leaders who gave their all. I'd ask the same thing about Pierre Charles. Were they known as men who were vainglorious and who lived high on the hog, flying all over the world with all kinds of bandits, mafiosi, banditti, fronting for us, not caring about a stimulus if it needed be? You know, I was talking to Rosie's brother not too long ago, and he said to me that their parents were well-to-do, but that their father and mother were very thrifty. And in the morning, they had to gather around the bed and pray. And in the evening, so I said, Irving mentions that in the book. Irving said you have to get down at 5:30 in the morning. He said, no, not 5:30 in the morning, 4:30. And sometimes after that, he had to go to church. So they were nurtured in a certain environment of Christian piety and charity and sharing and kindness and gratitude. Children are what they learn. I wonder how the Prime Minister grew up. I cast no aspersions, but I have great doubt. Despite his often noted affirmation that God is good all the time, and all the time God is good. Is he God? Is he the new idol, where people have allowed reason to flee from their cranial cavities, and they've given all their consciousness and consciences to one man, and they sit there in adoration of one man, and they fumble, and they obfuscate, and they prevaricate, and they engage in all kinds of distraction to deny the obvious, that is, we're being led down the garden path to hell and damnation. Let me speak to you a moment this evening about the callous disregard that this government has for Dominicans. In the midst of a pandemic, there were trained Dominican physicians, Dr. Pascal, Dr. Christian, Dr. Dangleben, and others, on, who could have been enrolled in providing assistance. Did they involve them? Or did they deny them involvement in their own country when Chinese and Cubans thank them for what they do? Not even able to speak English to the patients who are on the front line. Because your own people call you to task, call you out for your foolishness, for your ineptitude and your ingratitude and your deceit and your denial of our rights as human beings in our own country to be free and dignified. You have Chinese jacking Suki in town, holding him up. Suki, a laborite, a business person, man who's worked hard all the years I've known him in his own country. Do you think Chinese would allow that in China? So this is where we are. This is the price that we are paying in the mismanagement of our affairs, in the tyranny that's visited on us, in the disrespect. Call it by its name, Sheridan. Call it by its name, Dion. Brother Irving calls it always by its name, and Lambert, of course, doesn't say much because he's the one at master control. Lambert, thank you, sir. Disrespect. You have consistently disrespected your own people so that young Dominicans now don't even see Dominica as a place that they can enjoy. It's only a way station. The quicker they can get a visa to get out of Dominica, they're running away from you. Because all you care to do is to give them a red hat, a red shirt, and a red horn to jump up and down in the sun, playing the fool, you see. Where's the state college? You were Minister of Education and Ruzi came in. You harangued him for a ministry. You have a mansion for $64,000 and the state college lie in ruins. And the public library lie in ruins. And across the street, we have a $26 million palace with one man and his wife. And of course, that man dies here daily just for men. That's where we are in Dominica. So you have money for just for men and dying you're here in a $26 million palace, but you don't have money for stimulus. To hell with Dominicans. And we sit down there and we accept that, Dominicans? Is this the Dominica I cry of thee, sweet land of liberty, nature island, whitey kubuli? Domnice, pakite your poor Dominic Hodnu. Pakite your poor Dominic Hodnu. For those who've forgotten their part, what I mean is that Dominicans, do not let these crooks and criminals take Dominica away from you. They've already almost done it. Stand up, Dominica. Stand up for your country. Do the right thing. Be firm. Be fair. That's what our national anthem asks us to do. Let us make sure that this government, if they will not do right by the people, we get them out.
And thanks a lot for that, Brother Gabriel. I think it's just the right note on which we can wrap up, because I'm going to take your closing comments. You know, the time has overtaken us already, but the fact of the matter is, I mean, we have to take a decision at some point, Dominicans, as Dominicans. And we can see all of it in front of our eyes. I mean, nobody can say they can't see what is happening. There's not one single Dominican person who can tell me they don't see. Well, there may be a few, but most Dominicans tell me they're not really making progress. They're not getting wealthier. You know, they don't have more means than they had 10, 20 years ago. That's just not the case. I remember when Edward LeBlanc came in there and Edward LeBlanc elevated the farmers became wealthy. They bought their own, they built the houses, bought the vehicles. Which farmers can do that today? And we have $4 billion sitting out there and some people getting very wealthy from selling the state asset of a passport. So, gentlemen, I want to take your closing remark, but I have to just say as I go over to Dion for his closing remarks, that Dion, I really believe that I'm convinced, like so many of the callers who called, that we really ought not to allow democracy to be taken away from us. We cannot bring ourselves to what we see happening in some other countries where there is no democracy. We don't want to get to that point. I think it's time for Dominicans to stand up as one people, not as labor rights and UWP and church, but as one people to demand, look, our constitution requires that we have a democracy. We want to restore that. Forget about this no law, no constitution thing. We have a constitution. Let us restore it and stick to it. And let's have a real democracy. You don't want to have to depend on government for handouts so that you cannot say anything for fear that you might not get a handout. What kind of life is that? So we can't have that life. We can't have a life where you're fearful that if you say something, your child may not get a scholarship. You don't want to live like that. You can have a life where your sister is in a COVID thing there, and you cannot even say, well, listen, my sister is having a rough time, she's not getting attention, and somebody says, hey, you shouldn't say that because they might victimize you. Come on, is that the way we want to live? For how long do we want to live the rest of our lives? Frankly, gentlemen, here's what I'm saying. It's time for Dominicans to take stock. I mean, I'm telling Dominicans, all of us at home, abroad, everywhere, and friends of Dominica, let's just do the right thing. Really, let's say, look, let's reestablish our democracy. If we have to do what St. Lucia did, let's do what St. Lucia did, because government should be afraid of their people, not the way around, because the people who employ you, they vote for you to do the work for them, to take care of their needs. They cannot be afraid of you. They cannot be afraid of your police and so on. That is not something that ever happened at all, and we cannot get to that point. But it appears as if our callers are saying that we're almost at that point. We talk about the brutality of the bus drivers and other people. So, Dion, George, as you wind up, see if you can help us to establish clearly that we really don't want to go that way. We want to be a real, truly democratic and free people.
Well, Mr. Gregoire, I mean, thank you very much. And I want to recall what that last caller alluded to, the one who mentioned the fact about the police brutalizing the bus drivers. I mean, that's a salient point. In other words, what I think he's alluding to is that they have tried, and that's what happens. And that's why I believe the Nature Island, Dominica, Civil Liberties Foundation, the NIDCLF, that will be launched on the 24th, which is next week, Tuesday. It's an organization that stands for civil rights, for civil liberties, for good housing, to represent persons that cannot represent themselves. I think that organization would be a good organization for Dominica and Dominicans, not for any political party, for Dominica and for Dominicans. And I think it will be supported and it will be successful. That's the first thing I want to say. The other thing I want to say is we discussed what has happened in the Caribbean. Of course, what I call the Caribbean Spring Part B. And of course, tonight we had a sort of cursory view as to why these are happening. And of course, we parallel to Dominica. We're not having this as a propaganda program on a Tuesday night to bash any political party or to criticize. We are doing that because we do not want Dominica to end up like what happened in Haiti, like what happened in St. Vincent. We do not, it's because we love Dominica. I have to go to school tomorrow, but it's already 10 o'clock. But I'm doing that because I care, like every other panelist. And so the idea here is not to say you don't want NGOs. Oh, it's time to get rid. That doesn't make sense. And if you have any advisors, they would tell you that's an ill-advised statement. And so ultimately, sir, I think that the Dominican public that is listening, they can perhaps sense the sincerity in our voice, the sincerity in what we are saying, and forget party and think about country. And I will end on that note. Thank you very much. Thank you to my other panelists, and thank you, listeners.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that, Dion. I want to just go to Gabriel Christian, because Gabriel, for your closing remarks, I know you have a lot more to say because I mean we're all, but you know, have a program schedule here, and so we have to come to an end. But Gabriel, your closing remarks on all of this, particularly your notion of this thing, the chance of losing our democracy. I don't think Dominicans should even think about that. Rather, Dominicans should think positively of what they're going to do to ensure that they maintain their democracy. What they're going to do positively to ensure that they get that stimulus package. What they're going to do to ensure that that $4 billion that is out there comes home. What they're going to do to ensure is that you're not going to accept a 1% increase over 13 years when in 1979 we got a 121% increase because we stood up. The country stood up, public servants, everybody stood up. The country was one. and they got what they wished from the government. Gabriel, Christian, your final remarks in all of this.
Irving is here on this program because of love. Dion George is here on this program because of love of family and country. I don't believe that you could pay Lambie enough for what he does night after night, day after day, unless he had love in his heart for Dominica. And you too, Sheridan, I dare say, is impelled by that same generosity of spirit. We're not here for political reasons against the Labour Party. I have no shame to have confessed my affinity for the working class movement and the children of the poor, of which I come from. No say Zafa Laboué. I'm proud of that. But I'm not going to blind myself or ask young people or old people to blind themselves to the inequity of a government that claims to be a Labour government, but whose members do not even know their constitution, who've not even sat at a convention in God knows how long to discuss policy, when what we have is a one-man band. A one-man band who walks around and, takes taxpayers' money and builds a house. And he says, or he's heard to say, and I've heard it said enough to believe it, that if you meet them in a funeral or on a plane or by a shop, go up to them and call them traitor. And if some people are heard to say, this is Skerrit house, Skerrit give them a house. Jete, Glosho, Abayo, if they come on Skerrit step. Is that the country we're living in? Is that a country in the 21st century, the Dominicans who claim a 95, 96% literacy rate? Is this the kind of ethic that we're embracing? My friend, oftentimes I believe we've been bewitched. We've been bewitched by an evil and an animus that has destroyed not only Dominicans and civility between Dominicans, but also in the diaspora. Roosevelt Skerrit and his henchmen and henchwomen have destroyed diaspora organizations. There are people who do not talk to each other anymore. There are doctors in international organizations that will look at you as if to kill you if you speak against their idol Skerrit. They know who they are. Disgraceful. When a professional with a university education can look at another professional born in Dominica, went to school with them in Dominica, and they're so craven in their idolatry of this tyranny that they will not speak to their fellow Dominican. I can say then indeed we're in a living hell. Not a hell that God put us in, but a hell of our own creation. When as foolish people, we've allowed ourselves to allow one man to divide our nation. Dominica is more divided today and is more embittered because of the leadership of Roosevelt Skerrit and the poison that is inserted into the veins of our island. Family member against family member, friend against friend. Partisanship out of control. Disregard for the rule of law. Disregard for the Constitution. Disregard to the rule of tender. Disregard to the rules of the Geneva Convention on Diplomacy by having all kinds of foreigners front for us who are money launderers and criminals and crooks. Is that the country that we can be proud of? That is not my country. That is not your country, Sheridan. That's not the country that Dion George's father, who served as a Defense Force soldier, knew. That is not the country we can be proud of, that boys and girls, they want to run away from it. If it were the case he was doing good, they would want to run towards it. People vote with their feet. And people are leaving his paradise, his so-called paradise, where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And this Labour Party has become a Labour Party of an oligarchy, a craven oligarchy, selling passports and pocketing most of that for themselves and their friends and family. Verily I say unto you, my Dominican brethren, verily I say unto you, my Dominican sister, and you have a rendezvous with destiny. So Friday, 19th August, do yourself a favor. Do not be afraid. Do not be dismayed. Open your minds to the outstanding work that one of your own, he is not a Russian, he's not a Chinese oligarch, he's not someone who's plundered Iran. It's a grammar school boy. We're proud of him. Come listen to him talk about one of our own. And come buy some books. And I'm not trying to flog books, but very soon he won't be able to sell you any. Because the good news is, though we are disrespected and disregarded in our own country, a major publishing house wants his work. And a major university wants our work. Because while Dominicans are disrespected and disregarded in their country, have to run away because of this tyranny, this tin pot dictatorship, there are others who respect what we are trying to do. But we're not going to forget our country. We're not going to sell out our country. We're not going to abandon our country. We're not like rats running from a sinking ship. No, we'll do the best we can for our country, and we'll spare no effort in that regard. God bless you, sir. God bless you, Brother Landy. God bless you, Brother Dion. And Irving, one day, we'll once again walk as boys and girls, men and women, proud Dominicans with our heads held high, proud that we did not sell out for a mess of pottage. Good night.
And thanks a lot for that, Brother Gabriel Christian. And I'm going over now to Dr. Irving Andre, but certainly, Dr. Andre, the fact of the matter is, we talk about Caribbean Spring, but it seems to me that Dominicans have to ask themselves, we must take a leaf from the book of St. Lucia, for example. I mean, St. Lucia's democracy demands that you change your government from time to time. I mean, one of the most established democracies in the world, they went a little further to say that, look, you can only be there for 2 terms, 8 years total, and then you got to go. I mean, this is what democracy is about. It is not intended for any one person or one to be there forever. And you can see why. This is what you get when you have one group in there for too long. So here's what I say as I go over to you, Dr. Andre. I think it is probably advisable for Dominicans to re-establish their democracy, re-engage in establishing it by changing their government from time to time. There's nothing wrong with that, even if you like a party. There are many St. Lucians like UW in St. Lucia, but they changed them. I remember driving along with a taxi driver from your airport to Castries. He told me, look, I support the party, but you know something, we have to change the guy. We have to check it out because we have to try something else. He's sitting, he's complacent, he's not meeting all needs, he has to go. It's my party, we'll bring him back another time. Dr. Andre, let's go over to you for your closing remarks.
Well, let me thank you again for inviting me to be in this wonderful program. Let me thank Professor George. Let me thank the ever-eloquent Gabriel Christian. Let me thank the ever-dedicated Lambi. And let me thank the ever-committed G. What is there left to say? What are we afraid of? Are we afraid of honesty in government? Are we afraid of integrity in government? Are we afraid that $30 million of commission given to someone who never set foot in Dominica? Are we afraid that that $30 million is distributed among impoverished Dominicans? Are we afraid of the millions or billions of dollars that are hidden in mysterious accounts, according to Zampoli, are distributed and put to the service and the interest of Dominicans? Is that what we're afraid of? Are we afraid of having town councils who are given money to act on behalf of villages as opposed to filling the pockets of certain members? Are we afraid of persons standing tall, receiving benefits based on merit? Are we afraid of distributing aid donated by international agencies to Dominicans who deserve it, as opposed to Dominicans who will even resort to wearing the color red in every part of their daily attire? What are we afraid of? What is there to be afraid of? Aren't we part of the community of nations? Aren't we a proud people? Aren't we the legacy of people like Edward Oliver LeBlanc and Rosie Douglas and others? Are we afraid of our past? Are we ashamed of it? Do we love to grovel? Do we sell our souls by thinking it's imperative on a day-to-day basis to sing how great thou art? Or to sing, oh, I love Jesus? Or to say, I love God, but not the celestial being, but the government of Dominica? Is that the lesson that we are imparting to our children? Is that what we think that Dominica should be? Do we aspire to be better than this? Do we aspire, quite frankly, to take our place in the community of nations? Do we aspire to realize or to release the tremendous potential of the people? Or do we just are content to generate a group of oligarchs who, quite frankly, make mockery with the laws of Dominica? What is good governance? What is a democracy? What is civilization? What lessons have we learned from the past? What do we expect to bequeath to those who are coming after us? Where do we dare to go when they take their place or their places among other young people of their age? And they see how other young persons in other countries, how they're thinking. They're thinking about the climate. They're thinking about the equal distribution of wealth. They're thinking of being advocates for indigenous and oppressed peoples worldwide. They're thinking of the upliftment of the civilization. They're thinking of cleansing the planet. And what are we thinking of? Destroying our rivers, giving away our parrots, selling our souls. Is that the extent of our ambition? Are we not proud of persons like Gabriel, like Dion, like Mr. G, and others who've toiled in the wilderness, who've been nurtured on a diet of hard work by the sweat of your brow? You shall eat mastiff bread or a mastiff from Afuawi, as opposed to expecting it in a brown paper bag in the middle of a night like a thief in the night. Just today, there was a truck shown on Facebook filled with bags of whatever it is, probably taboo, topi taboo, or babawule, I don't know, to be given out to the party faithful. Is that the extent of our development? Is that what we take pride in or joy in? We have to preach a gospel of redemption, one where embrace each other, one where people are expected to fail, one where people are receiving the benefits that they deserve. Some of us, our folks are poor not because they are lazy or indigent, it's because of a conspiracy of circumstances in which they are not given a little help to improve their circumstances. And that is what we do. The strength of our democracy, quite frankly, is measured by the strength of the weakest among us. And we as a people, in my respectful view, we have to seek to correct that. That is what the Bible teaches us. It doesn't teach us that the pastor should get a duty-free concession on a 100,000 SUV with dark tinted glasses, or another one who should get $50,000 to celebrate his 50th birthday. That is not what it is all about. That's a perversion of the whole religious ethos. We have to do better, and we will. One final word, if I may, Mr. G. I have received requests about getting the book because of the particular crisis that we face. And let me say parenthetically, irrespective of what persons may think, I'm of the view that we should all take the virus if we can. I've heard different justifications, all the vaccine. I've heard different justifications from not taking it. But I don't need any other evidence than what I've seen the correlation between the increase in virus in the vaccine and the reduction in infection. We've seen it in the States. We've even seen it in Dominica. And to those who have a different view, all I say to you is this. Let me ask you one question. Do you think you and Lazarus are two sisters' children? Do you think that when you get sick and you're being called to the pearly gates, somebody will shout, who's in Lazarus? V-way. You are not going up into the celestial heaven. Do you think really and realistically that something like that will happen? Or do you think that if in fact you play Russian roulette with your life and the life of those who you hold there, that quite frankly, when the inevitable comes, you will be hearing the song of Chogi Mark, Palap and Viwe Ito Ta. Meditate on these things. Meditate on the common sense wisdom of our people. One final word. Because of the COVID and because of the impending lockdown, first, there may be some difficulty in getting the books that we will be talking about, hopefully, on Friday. I will indicate that I have two numbers for anyone who is desirous of seeking a copy. The first number is 295-7958. 295-7958. And the other is 295-7961. I'll repeat the numbers. But again, given the new dispensation, even our local bookstore and the proprietors of J's, let me say parenthetically, have been very supportive over the years in terms of helping writers, Dominican writers, offer their books to the public. And I salute them. But the fact of the matter is, because of the crisis, the bookstore is closed. So we'll have to do it the old-fashioned way. I'll repeat the numbers, but I should indicate that anyone who's seeking a copy of either book, they can call one of these two numbers, and they would be told where to pick it. So once again, Mr. G, and the panelists, and your listeners, those who did not take advantage of Black Pudding Tuesday, let me end with this positive note. There is a country to build. It is worth building. You do not want to lament the fact that when you had an opportunity to save it, you did nothing. Let me leave that thought with our people. Thank you very much.
And here's my sort of closing remarks as we say goodnight. And we can all turn on our mics so that we can say goodnight to our folks out there. But on a very positive note, here's what it is for me. It's simple. Let's look at our neighbors. So Guyana changed the government. They have a democracy. They change from time to time. They're okay. They're doing all right. So Trinidad changed the government from time to time. They seem to be doing okay. Grenada changed theirs. They're doing okay. I mean, St. Vincent has changed theirs. They haven't changed it for a while, but we see what the problem they're having now. St. Lucia changes the government. They still do it. Barbados is doing it. Antigua, St. Kitts has done it. The fact of the matter is, all those that have done it, in case we are afraid to change our government in our democracy from time to time, take a look at our neighbors. You see, they're all doing a little better than we are. In other words, when you change your government in the democracy from time to time, they perform better. But once you keep them there forever, they don't need to perform because they figure, oh, you'll vote for me because of your. This is sound advice. Look at our neighbors, St. Kitts and all the others. They change. This is democracy at work. They change their governments from time to time. Dominicans, do not be afraid to do that. It's okay. The party you like will come back another time. Make a change. Okay, try to get better at this. So I want to just leave this by saying, everybody, we need to preserve our democracy. Let's not cry, die, and say, okay, democracy has already gone out the window. We need to stand firm and protect our democracy. And I think the best way to do that is from time to time, change your government. You'll get different policies, you'll get different strategies, different plans and programs. Try something. All right, so gentlemen, I really want to thank every single one of you, Dr. Dion George, Dr. Andre, Gabriel Christian, Lambi, Sherwin, all our listeners, all the people who are on Facebook and the people who call and those who did not get a chance to call, all the friends of Dominica who are listening, all the agencies and organizations that are represented that are listening. Thank you for listening and thank you for your contributions here tonight, gentlemen. I really appreciate this conversation tonight. I thought it was terrific. And needless to say, everybody was at the A game tonight. All right. And even Lambie made sure that we heard the calls clearly tonight, in spite of the fact that some of the callers did not raise their voices, but Lambie made sure that we heard them. So thank you very much, Lambie, as well. And gentlemen, just left for me to say good night to everybody. And everybody have a very, 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 very pleasant night.
Good night.
Wonderful. Good evening to everyone, and we will
Right.
see you
Thank you.
on the in
Yes.
Thank you, Lambi.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lambi.
Yeah,
Thank you,
That's right.
Sheridan, Irving, Dion.
All right.
Right.
Same to you, Gabriel. All right.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Excellent.